which we haven't done yet, but okay. So before we get started discussing the use of accordion files, intelligent agents, and replace strings, I'm going to share a couple of papers with you in the chat, and I'll just take a second or so. And these are two studies that have come out within, well, one of them just a few months ago, and the other, I think about a year and a half or 2 years ago. They broke the cable. There should be some over, no, there's not many of those. There should be some in the bin on the left. Did Doug break it?
I don't think so.
I bet he did. Okay, never mind. We are recording, so.
So John,
okay, so let me. We had a technical issue in the other room that the cable for the microphone is broken. You could try connecting the other. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to drop two. Try this again. I'm going to drop two papers in the chat. The first, well, this first one, well, I think they're both going to go in. One of them is called My Professor Cares. And this was a study done by some economists a couple of years ago, well, actually about 5 years or so ago now, but it was just published about, I think, within the last year or so. And in this study, students were exposed to an intervention where the instructor just provided some feedback to students after the first two assessments. And my recollection of this, I meant to look at it a little bit more carefully, but what was found is that by providing students with feedback about their grades and what they can do to improve with what appeared to be a personal email, although it can be automated, and some of and one component of it they did do an automated email, where basically students were getting some feedback saying, you know, I see you struggled, that this material is difficult, but here are some resources you can use to be more successful. And what they found is that that intervention resulted in significant improvements in course persistence, in the grades of the course and GPA, and that effect lasted for 4 years later, in just a couple of emails basically to students in an introductory course when they were freshmen. It had a slight positive effect for everyone, but the effect was particularly large for Black and Hispanic students, who in general tend to have higher rates of this. So that study found basically that some of those equity gaps in outcomes were reduced by just simply sending an email. Now, the other experiment was done by Elizabeth Canning and a couple of other people. She's done some really great work. She's a psychologist, and this was, I believe, it was either a biology or chemistry class. It was taught by a biochemist, which is why I don't remember which. But here they used a randomized controlled experiment with, I believe, about 400 or 500 students, where half of them were exposed to a treatment and the other half were not. And it was very similar in structure in that all students got an email after their first two graded activities, but half the group got a standard email, the control group, which basically said, here are some resources you can use to be, you know, to help prepare or to cover any gaps that you might have. And that went to all students. The other half of them had a slight growth mindset message included in addition to that basic material, you know, saying that I know this material is difficult, but with, you know, continued practice, you can be successful. And it's really common for students to struggle on these initial exams. And what they found in that study, it was very similar, although it was a slightly different group that was, well, an overlapping group to a large extent. But what they found is that it benefited all students a slight amount, but it had an especially large impact on first-gen students. And so that's one of the motivations for this. And there's also been a tremendous amount of research talking about the importance of structure, providing clear expectations to students and so forth. Vijay Sethi and Kelly Hogan in their book on inclusive teaching talk about that a lot, and they've done several studies actually Kelly Hogan had done several studies, and Vici, I think, has done some, but they cite a lot of that in their book on inclusive teaching. So that's part of the motivation for all of this. And what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a little bit about how I built some of these things into my courses. And I'm going to share the screen and then drag it over. I have no idea what's behind here, but we'll find out in just a second. Nothing is behind there. Okay, so let me bring over my course shell. This is a course shell from an intro course that I used last semester. And I just want to talk a little bit about some simple types of structure you can build into the course using Brightspace tools. And I'm just going to pick a random module in my course eventually when it opens. Okay. Oh, well, apparently the last thing I looked at was labor markets. I haven't opened this today, but in each of the modules in my course, it starts with a module overview. And
John,
the module overview, yes.
John, I'm so sorry. We're seeing, we're not seeing your Brightspace page. We're seeing a list of CELT presentations.
I am so tired. And what happened is if I had left it on the other screen, it would have worked. I shared the wrong screen, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, no,
Didn't I get that correct this time? So this time I'm going to share the correct screen. And here we go. And now you should see it. Okay.
Yeah.
So each module contains a module overview, which many people include. But the module overview just provides, well, one of the things I did is this module happens to be on labor markets. So I found some Creative Commons or OER or public domain images, searching on through some of those tools that match this. And so here there was a little bit of a protest, but I think it was a labor strike. No, this was a Black Lives Matter one. So maybe that wasn't as good of a match as some of the others in terms of the focus of this. But in each of the module, I have broken down the overview into 3 simple things that are all organized pretty compactly using accordion files. And the first thing is the module overview, which just provides an overview of the main topic. It would be nicer if I motivated that a little bit more on this one. This was getting towards the end of the semester, so I didn't. But here are the specific learning objectives for the module, describing what they'll be focusing on. And then the last part is required materials for the week. This class is an introductory economics class, and it's using a Waymaker module. But basically, they're told this week, oh, this is not the one I wanted to show. This is, I picked the wrong one. This class was apparently my large class. A lot of the material is going to look very similar, but I do more of these things with my online class. So let me just hop out for a second and grab my online course, which will have very much the same structure, but let me try this again. This is my online class here. There we go. And apparently an assignment was turned in after the semester ended, as well as discussion posts. I'm not sure why that happened. Well, I can't believe I missed discussions. Well, in any case, let's try this again, and we'll go to content. And content. Content. Okay, here we go. This was what happened to come up, applications of demand and supply. One of the things we talk about in there are price controls. So I grabbed an image of some rationing books from World War II. But in any case, a typical module starts with an overview, and it's, again, going to look very similar to the material in the other class, but I just got more of these things in the online class because students who are taking an asynchronous course need a little bit more support than those in a face-to-face class where you see them every day, although much of the material will look very much the same. So here's just an overview of what they'll be covering. Here's the learning objectives for the course, basically looking at the effects of price ceilings and price floors, measures of consumer and producer surplus, and in which this particularly may be applied in the cases of labor markets and financial markets. And then there's a list of required activities where in this course, I was using a Waymaker module. So there's a study plan, which is basically the textbook filled with formative assessments and some summative assessments, where the formative assessments, they can take them as many times as they want, and they get feedback on it automatically. And each time they take one, they'll get a different mix of questions. There's thousands of questions in there. Then I had 2 discussion forums, just a reminder of what they have to do. And then at the end of each module, there is a module quiz. And then they were also working on podcast projects in here. And this is a component of the podcast project they did that week. And then there was a little bit more, they had to submit it and so forth. And then there was an exam, which I had written, where these occurred every other week. But it's just a little reminder, these are the things that are due, mentioning the dates when they're due, except for overall, everything's due on the 25th, but there's also, it tells you when things open up. So, but again, you notice there's a lot of information there, but it's stored in a pretty compact structure by using an accordion file. So if you haven't used those, we can talk about that if you'd like. But it's just a really compact way of putting in more information. Then the other thing, or another thing here, is checklists. And each semester, when I've been using, since I started using these the very first semester I started in Brightspace, students at the end of the term said one of the things they liked the most was the use of these checklists. And so it's basically the same sort of information that students saw, except it gives them, well, if we go to a student view, and actually will this be visible? It won't be visible in student view because the course was last fall. But what will happen is it will give them a checklist and they check the boxes next to each thing that was due. And that way it gives them a reminder of what they need to do. And in there, it puts in the due dates for each things, and that pops up in the course calendar. You can also add the due dates on the actual activities in some cases, but some of the things were done outside of the course, like the podcast proposal, which went into a Google form or something similar. And again, they get reminders of all these things. So the basic categories I used for this was, these are the things they had to complete. These were the things they could watch, supplemental YouTube videos, which were also organized by the learning module, the learning objectives for the module, the discussion participation, and I break it up so that they have to put in an initial post by a couple of days before the end of the module, and then they had to reply to other people, and so forth. And you can put in whatever's appropriate. You can break them into whatever categories are appropriate for your course. But the checklist is something that students find really helpful. And I put them always right at the top of the module. So one of the things they see is, this is what you need to do. These are the things you need to complete, and check them off once they've been completed. Then I also have some video quizzes. Those are stored in a separate thing outside of the course, and they're reminded about it. There's some review videos, which again, I believe in this course I was using the accordion folders tied to, depending on how many there were, sometimes it was just individually, other times they were broken down by the learning objectives for the module. Most often that's what I did. And if this ever loads, it will show them. But basically it's all aligned with the content modules or the learning objectives throughout all of this. And there we go. So here were some YouTube videos on price ceilings and floors. Here's were something on consumer and producer surplus. And here were some applications in labor and financial markets. So if they click on it, it will show them all the videos. But it's a nice compact way of allowing students to quickly get to whatever support materials they need. And basically, when you create these, you just put the HTML in there, and you just use the embed code, and you can put videos. You know, and I find this much more accessible for students when you group them like this, rather than just having a list of like 15 or 20 videos. And these are optional. And basically, they're encouraged to use them as needed based on how they're doing on the formative assessments. So if they're doing poorly on our formative assessments, and they also watch videos I created with embedded questions, and if they're struggling with that, I encourage them to use some of these other YouTube videos, because hearing things in a different voice with different applications can help connect better with some students than my videos or the ones provided within the Waymaker package, which is a free textbook, basically. It's roughly, it's technically personalized learning, but it's very close in structure to an adaptive learning module. And then just walking through it a little bit more here. These were the other tests they had to do. There's the exams, there's a quiz, there's the discussions. And you notice with the discussions, it has the beginning date and the ending dates and so forth. But the checklist reminds them to get an initial post up by a certain date. And, if they don't, they lose, like, I think it's 0.8 on the week's discussion grade, but it's just a small penalty. But, one of the problems is when I've tried using discussions and I just let students post anytime until the end of the module, everyone would tend to post at the end, except for that one person who wants to get a start on it early. And by setting a date where everyone has to do an initial post, it makes it easy for other people to find someone else to reply to. And so this has worked pretty nicely, as long as you remind students of it. And one of the things you'll see is there are built-in automated reminders for students who haven't done it. So that's how this is structured. Now, has everyone worked with accordion folders? Is there would anyone like to see that, or we can easily set one up? Magdalena, I see you nodding. Would you like to see us?
Yeah, can you
Okay.
please? Yeah, I like to
Sure.
see one.
So all you need to do to create an accordion folder is you just create a page. And this could be anywhere where you normally have a file. So now it's called create a file, which is basically just an HTML document. And it's going to create it, and it's blank. But what you can do here to create an accordion is select a document template. And you would go down until you see accordions, and it will create an accordion with this really ugly picture that appears on thousands and thousands of these pages because it's the default. What I always do is get rid of it because it just looks kind of generic like any of the others. Now you can put your own images in, and in the Brightspace documentation, or you could look it up, it tells you the dimensions, and you can crop things down to those dimensions. For the images I've used Canva, and I just have a template of that dimensions, and then I put whatever I want in it, searching for OER material, Creative Commons or public domain images, or sometimes images I've created and just add some text to those. But what happens is this default thing, we also now have the Creator Plus. I don't want to get into that. They spent an hour and a half talking about just that to create that. This morning, there's a video from there, which will show you how you can use that to create accordions. But this is a really simple and easy way. And what they do is they give you accordion structures here between 1 and 6. And let's say we wanted to create 3. We would go up and we would go above 3, and we would simply delete everything above that. And then we would go down and we would get rid of the stock copy in this too. Then we would go down to the bottom, and we would go and take everything after that block of accordions and delete it. Now, you have to do this before you put any content in there, because when you change the style, when you change to a new template, it overwrites whatever's there. So if you already have a page, copy it, insert the accordion, and then paste it in. But to be even safer, create a brand new file and copy and paste it from where you have it stored into there. And then all you need to do to create that accordion is you just put the title. And so let's say this is topic 1. And then you would put whatever text you want in here. So this would be text for topic 1. And that could be anything that would normally be on a page, you can embed there. And then you would do the same thing for each of the, let me undo that. Control Z is always your friend. And now you do the same thing where this would be the topic 2 title. And then you would put whatever the text is here, etc. Now, with this, you're only allowed 5, but one thing you could do if you wanted to have 6 or 7 is you could just copy the others and paste them after each other. Or if you want to be if you're more comfortable with HTML, you can always go into the HTML editor, which is why am I not seeing the HTML? It should look like a less than greater than sign. Maybe is it in here? There it is. So if you want to do it yourself to modify and add others later, you could either just paste two accordions next to each other, or you could just look at the structure of it and you see that this is the beginning of it, and you could just copy and paste and add it at the end and just rewrite it. If you're not comfortable with HTML, it's probably easier just to stack accordions. So if you have 9, take one of 5 and one of 4 and put them next to each other. But that's your accordion. And then when students would look at it, it would look very much like, oh, you need a title for it. So this title is Sample Accordion. There. And that would be whatever would be contained in there. So mine were practice videos, for example, or something like that. And once you have them, you can always copy them from one module to another and just fill it with different material. So it's pretty easy to do that. You can just copy from any module to another one, or even just copy and paste the information into another one. Okay, so any questions about accordions? If you want to be more sophisticated with it, where you have a bit more control of how many items without having to do the copy and paste, you could look at the video on Creator Plus, where you're able to do this, as well as create a whole other host of different styles and formats. But this is what's available in the base Brightspace, which is all we had up until a couple of weeks ago when we did get the Creator Plus. But again, this works, and it works perfectly fine. It's just there may be easier ways of doing it if you have bigger accordions without having to copy and paste 2 of them together. Okay, now because this is a course shell I'm probably going to be using in the future, I am going to delete it. But you notice how nice and neat that is. And you could put in whole pages there, you could put in lists of videos, you could put lists of resources or references or anything you want in an accordion. And it just makes it easier for students to find the material without going through a long scroll. And that works on mobile devices as well as on laptops. Okay, any questions on accordions? Okay, the next thing we were going to talk about is actually before intelligent agents, let's talk about replace strings. And replace strings are remarkably powerful. Every now and then we use that when we send an announcement out from SELT. And one of the reasons we don't do it too often is because it goes out to everyone with the first name in it. And people think that the email came directly from us. And we get a lot of email responses to it because they think this was a personalized email and not something that was sent out to about 800 people. And that can lead to a lot of responses, which is nice.
If you're teaching.
If you're teaching, it will look like you're sending a personalized message to your students. So let's say we want to do an announcement, and I'm not going to actually send it, but we can go through the steps. And so we'll do a new announcement. So here was some feedback that was provided on the second final submissions of podcast, but I'm going to send out a new announcement to last fall's class, and I'll just say, let's just say feedback on something. And there we go. And I actually spelled it correctly. So what you could say is, you could say hi, and then you would put in the person's name, and you would use curly braces, the shift square braces key, and put in first name. I don't remember if the capitalization is essential, but it's looked better this way. And then there's also a last name one, and I think there's also a full name one, which would have first and last name. But this is a way of creating an impression of a personal message. And when I do this in a class of 300 or 400 students, they're all getting emails that are addressed to their name. And that tends to get them a little bit more attention. there is research, it's not quite in this format, but there is research where if you are listening to a conversation, and if you're in a crowded room and there's lots of conversations going on, and someone mentions your name, even if it's not you they're talking about, all of a sudden your attention gets focused on that. And it's possible some of that may occur with this too, but it certainly feels more personal than just a mass announcement or email that goes out to everyone. And then you would put in whatever is appropriate here. So here's the rest of the message. And then when you're done, you would just click publish, and then they would get an announcement, which would show up in their email, which says hi, and then whatever their first name happens to be. So it's a nice way of creating at least the sense of personalization. So we're not actually, we're going to cancel this because I don't know if that would go out to my class, but that would look really strange if it did. Okay, so just remember curly braces and then first name. And I believe, well, I always use capital F and
I've always seen it
Capital
that
L.
way. I've always used it that way. So that's, I think, probably the safe.
it's the
option.
safest thing to do.
Yeah.
And it's also, it's not a bad practice if you're going to be using alt text or other things for screen readers, because then it will recognize when it sees a string of letters with no spaces that they are actually separate words, and it makes it easier for screen readers to address that. Okay, but now the real power of this, and this is one where I would encourage you to be in Brightspace if you're not already.
Yeah.
Click on tools and
About the announcements, John. So thank you for that. When you are sending out an announcement like that, and I understand it'll go to the students' emails with their first name, how will it appear in the announcements widget on the homepage of your course? Will it appear
It'll say your
exactly
name.
the same.
bracket first
Yeah.
name?
It will
Or
have
it'll
their
have
name.
their own, or it'll have their own name. Oh.
It will have their name. So
Oh,
it's based on whoever is logged in
Yeah.
reading it. So it, you know, if you're, and so if it was on the Self thing, when you logged in, you would see the announcement with hi and then the first name, which makes, because if it did say hi first name, that would
Yeah.
kind of take away the whole
ruined it.
illusion
Yeah.
of the personalized
Yeah.
message. But
So when you are signed into your Brightspace and you're looking at announcements that you've sent out, it will say your name. It'll say Rebecca. on
yes,
it. So I
so
always
even
get
yourself
confused
will see it that
because
way.
it'll say Margaret, and I'm like, who's Margaret in my class? And it's me, right? Like
Because
who
that's the
it's
official
referring to.
person.
That's my, yeah. So that,
Okay.
so you will see your name, and that's kind of a nice way to know that it worked.
That it worked. Okay.
You'll see your own name.
And it should be whatever their preferred name is.
Yes.
So
Yeah. Whatever they've set up as their
at least
preferred
in
name.
theory, I know there were some problems with that initially, but it should be working now.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, so course admin, and this is what I find the most powerful. Checklists are really useful. Students love it. But one thing that's really remarkably powerful are intelligent agents, which are under communications.
Mhm.
This gives us back something that we lost the whole time, or much of what we had before we moved into that Blackboard mess. Okay, because we used to have this in a prior learning management system in Angel. In fact, it was even more powerful there. But here's a really useful tool. And what we're going to do is create a login reminder. But I already have one, but I'm going to create a new one. And I encourage you to do this. This is something that is probably not a bad thing to do if you use Brightspace at any way in your course. If not, you can always delete it. But what I'd encourage you to do is just click on New Agent. And there it is. Okay, so I'm going to call this a junk, but you probably weekly reminder, login reminder, just so that I don't delete the one I'm actually using when the course rolls over, and I don't want two of them going out. So here, the name is for your own purpose, so you remember what each one does. Students won't see it. You could put in a description. I think from this, the title is probably enough, but you could say this is a weekly reminder sent to students who have not logged in the past week. And again, if it's a face-to-face class and you don't have a lot of work for them in there, you might not want to do this. But you know, I think many of us have a lot of things you're doing in here. Now, you can also define categories. In this particular class, I have 3 types of reminders. I have participation reminders saying you know, here are things you need to do. I have discussion reminders. And I also, you know, borrowing the terminology from Starfish, put in kudos when people are doing relatively well. So they get an announcement congratulating them on how they're doing. And so what I'm going to do, and I'll just stick this in for now, I'll stick it in participation. It's a pretty minimal participation, making sure they log in once a week. And we'll hold off on enabling the agent until the end. But what I would suggest is if it's going to be a weekly login reminder, you'd probably want to pick weekly, but you can set these up so they run once, so they run every hour, which would be really kind of harassing with many of these. But if you have a deadline approaching and people haven't done it, I think that would probably be a little annoying, but certainly you might want to do something daily, because this is something that goes only to people who fill a certain condition. It's not going to go to everybody. So it could be monthly, or it could be once a year, which, you know, if they're only checking in once a year would not be useful. So weekly, let's say, and we want to repeat it every week. It could be every other week, it could be every third week, or however often. And let's say we want this to repeat on Thursday at well, let's make this 4:02 p.m. There. And again, it could be whatever time works. In general, for a login reminder, doesn't matter that much. You could even do it at 3 in the morning, which might make them think that you're really paying a lot of attention to them. And you put in the start and end date of it. So it will begin at a certain date. You probably don't want this to begin a week or two before the semester, but you might want it to begin on the first day of the semester. So let's say this is going to begin, let's say this is for the fall, and let's say, I don't know when the fall semester starts. I'm trying to block that out right now, but it's going to be sometime in August, let's say. So we will go out to August. Oh, come on. I have a bigger screen normally than this, but here it keeps scrolling down. But you know, you don't have to do it that way. You could just say, let's say this is going to be August 30th, 2024, except I want to put in the right typing. There we go. So it's going to start on August 30th, and it's going to end on, let's say, you could do this indefinitely, but that would be annoying once the semester's over. Let's say it's going to end on 12/17, let's say 2024. And so
The start date reset.
what?
Because you
Oh,
put-
it reset. I didn't save it apparently. So let's set that again, August, let's say 31st, 2024, and then press return so it locks it in. Why did it do that?
You accidentally put September 31st and it didn't recognize it as a date.
One more time, 8/31/2024, right?
Yep.
Okay, and that worked. Okay, I messed up. So this is how often it will occur, but then you have to tell it what determines this. And well, first you tell it who it goes to, because you might have people with different roles. You might have students, you might have TAs, you might have graduate assistants, you might have interns or other things in there.
Mhm.
But in general, most of the time, well, you could choose this and it will tell you what the roles are. And these are all the SUNY roles, and including Brockport and what is BUC? I'm not sure. Well, here's Alfred State, you know, we probably don't want to send these to people at other institutions in general. So what I would suggest is just make it for everyone visible in the classes. Those are your students. TAs would get it too. And if you do have TAs, you probably want them logging in every week too. And the simplest thing is you can choose login activity or course activity. Login is just checking to see if they logged in. Course activity is whether they've logged into Brightspace. Course activity is whether they've actually logged into your course after they've logged into Brightspace. And that's probably the more significant one. And you could say user has not accessed a course in the last 7 days, for example. And then every week, it would check to see if there's anyone who's disappeared for the last 7 days, and that would be the condition. And so you then choose create to lock that in. And oh no, I'm sorry. So that is a condition. This is if you want to use something else. So this is already done. And then the next thing is, we've told it how often to do this. We've told it what the condition is that will do it. The next thing we have to do is tell it what to do. And you have first a choice of doing this only once when the criteria is satisfied. But if this is really a weekly login reminder, you want this to happen every time this occurs. Otherwise, it will only do it the first time they haven't been there. Now, there may be something where if they enrolled in a group, you might only want to send a message to them once they enroll. You don't want to repeat that, for example. But there are some things that you want only to happen once. For a weekly reminder, though, you want it to happen every time. And then we're going to have it send an email to the student. And it will come from system no reply, which takes away some of the personalization. But here, what we're going to use, and if you click on this, I think it gives you the names. No, it doesn't. Okay. You could have it emailed to a certain person, but the actual form, let me see if I can go back to that. I hope I didn't get rid of it. Let me go forward. I did not mean to jump out of there. Well, yeah, okay, this is it. So the action, one more time. This is an action that we wanted to send an email when the condition is satisfied. And we had given it a name. So this is, let's just call this test. I would call it weekly reminder. Mm-hmm. And there should be an option of setting the email. And I thought it popped up this. What's not happening? Oh, is that under, it's under actions?
Yeah, it should be under action.
It should be, and that should have popped up.
Maybe it needs to get refreshed.
Let me just save this and see if maybe that will help. Unable to complete your request. It may be because this course isn't active now. Or did the dates disappear? Scheduling, weekly. And criteria is there. This is all where we set it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Actions every time. I wonder if there's something under here. If there's another window that popped up. Well, I'm going to save this and then. Let's see. And let me see. Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to exit from here and show you the actual one I created. I think what happened is when it hopped out, something went wrong. And in this case, I'll look at the actual reminder. And this was in the last week, 5 users were identified. So this is the one I actually used. And here we go. So it's all going to look very much the same, except this should have the actual email. Okay. And we got to this and then it disappeared. I don't know why. But what you use, and this is important, you have to use initiating user in curly braces as the address, because what it does is it will check to see if this condition applies for each and every student. And for those students for which the activity is initiated, this will occur. And in this case, the initiating user is anyone who has not logged in the past 7 days, for whom that condition is satisfied. And then you could send a carbon copy to someone. If you had TAs, you could send it to them, etc. But I just send a blind carbon copy to myself. So that way, whenever a student gets an email about not logging in, I get a notification of that, but they don't see my name there. So they're not sending me emails, in response to this, but I can reach out to them. But if you have like 400 students in the class, you might not want them automatically responding to you, although they often will anyway. And then you do the same thing, except initiating user is used for the full email address of the student, and using a replace string here, instead of using first name as the replace string, you have to use initiating user first name to get it to go to them. So this is a really simple message. It just says, hi, whoever the name happens to be. It's been over 7 days since your last course access. It's important to keep up with your work so you don't fall behind. And if you don't remember initiating user and initiating user first name, you can just click on this. What replace strings can I use in the subject and message? And pretty much it's these that you're going to use. That the organization unit would be SUNY as we go, and you probably don't need that, whatever that name is stored. This would be the starting date for the org unit, which again is not going to be very useful for this. But the initiating user first name, initiating user last name, or this could be the username. But the username of the initiating user is that SUNY unique ID, which is that really strange number that no one really knows, but it's buried in there, and it will show up when you get an export file. And you could include, well, here, this is actually new. You do have the last login date, and so you could embed that. So instead of saying it's been over 7 days, it could say you last logged in on, and then put in curly braces, last login date. That wasn't there when we last looked at that. So there have been some updates. So
Yeah.
check that periodically, and you might want to embed that in the message. So, and then this would basically just send an email between the starting and ending dates of the semester. And when you roll a course over, it would update the dates if you use the date schedule thing. So that can be really helpful. But now this is just one thing, and it will happen every week. Students will get an email if they haven't been there, and you'll get an email. You'll be copied on the email, so you know which students are disappearing, so you can reach out to them. And you may have already reached out to them, but at least this way you know. But now there's other ones. So here I have a discussion reminder, and I have this for each of the discussion in there. And I have 2 discussions each week in this group. One is a content discussion, and one is a reflection type of discussion. And this is just a little reminder to receive full credit. They lose like 0.8 out of 5 points or something, or no, 0.8 out of 10 points if they don't submit it by the soft due date for the first post. Well, I guess it's a hard due date for the first post, but what happens is it's scheduled for a specific date. Well, that has to be updated, but it would be a one-time run, which the dates would have to be set each semester. The criteria here for this one, though, is here. You notice we had these activities for login activities, but you also have the option of creating an event. And the creating event here was, they have not created any threads in this discussion forum, the reflection, the metacognitive discussion forum, or in the content discussion forum. And this is specific to those. So basically, those are 2 criteria. And we'll look at how you can do others. And basically, if they haven't participated, and it says any condition must be met. So if they haven't participated in one or the other, they get this email reminding them that they have until midnight that night to get their first discussion and to get full credit for the discussions. But you could also do it if you only want them to meet. If they only have to submit at least one, you could require that both conditions be met. And that works pretty nicely too. So, that's how you do it. But now let's go through and actually just look at one other one. We're going to create a new agent, and we're going to look at all the possibilities you have here for that agent. We're not going to go through the things we've already talked about, but let's just go down to the criteria, because here we'll make it for everyone in the class list. But instead of choosing login, we're going to create something here. And here the conditions are whether they've submitted an assignment, whether they've received feedback on the assignment. So you could have it check hourly whether you've provided feedback, and it will automatically send students an email saying you've received feedback on this assignment without you having to do that. It could be whether they received feedback on a submission, or whether It could send them the score on the associated rubric, whether they've not submitted to an assignment folder. It could be whether they've received an award if you're using certificates or badges in your course for some gamification. It could be whether they've completed the checklist item or specific checklist items, or whether their checklist has not yet been completed, or whether it's a specific item they haven't checked off yet. Although I would probably do it by the actual item rather than by the checklist completion, because it's more important they actually do the work than that they check the box. But there's also, you could use competencies that they've mastered this. If you're doing standards-based grading, you could have something where they've met this competency and they get an announcement about that. It could be whether they viewed something, whether they visited a page, whether they haven't visited a page, whether they've completed a topic, whether they've not completed the topic. And similarly, the ones I'm using there were ones that were based on discussions. And with discussions, it could be whether they posted something, whether they got a discussion score, or whether they haven't posted anything on the topic. You could also take any gradebook column, including the overall grade for the course, and send them feedback based on how they're doing. You could send them a message saying, you know, congratulations on your good work, keep up the great work, etc. If their overall average is above some threshold. You could do the same thing based on a rubric score, or you could give them specific feedback if they're below that. And you could also send a message when the final grade scores are released automatically without you ever having to do it yourself. You can do it based on quiz scores or whether they completed surveys. And then you can, some of those have additional embeds that you could send in the message to get those results. So we're going to cancel this one, but there's a lot of things you can do. And let me just show you, I think I have some in this class that are a little bit more complex, where the feedback, did I do it in this class? If not, I've done it in another one, but I think, no, I didn't. I have some that were based on their overall grade in different ranges. So you could set some feedback if their overall grade is below a 50. You could have others if it's between a 50 and a 65. Others if they're between a 65 and a 70. Others if they're 90 or above, for example, for specific assignments or overall, where automatically generates some feedback. So I know that's a lot, but do you have any questions about this? They're really powerful tools. And I've been talking a lot.
No, you're good, you're good. I've been monitoring our other sessions. So, but I think the agents have been really helpful. You can, in those emails that you send, you can implement some growth mindset things, some encouragement, link to resources along, around campus. There's really like so many possibilities and ways to use that. But I have had just time and time again, students really raving about the reminders, which, you set them up once, you can copy them over from course to course. So you're not, you might have to switch some dates and things around. But other than that, you can really, take some time, do it nicely once, and then you can add them from course to course.
And not just from course to course. Once you create them for one module, you can copy it. And then just update it for the next module if it's a one-time event. And also from course to course as well.
Yeah, so it's, it takes a little time to set it up, but then you can really, employ it across courses and modules and such. But I've had students just really appreciate the reminders. I've had students, very much liking the checklists that John had talked about, just as ways to keep their keep the transparency about their grades like very obvious to them, and it's been great.
Since there's other criteria, yes, Rebecca.
Well, I was actually, if there's time for you to go back and show us how to make a checklist, I've just been playing with it here.
Sure.
Courses. And when I pull it up, it just looks like a regular page with just text.
Okay.
I don't know how it turns into a checklist.
One thing I'm just checking here, because so with the criteria, by the way, you have less than or equal, or you could do less than or equal, and you can put multiple criteria, so you can get a range of values. But what I'm wondering about, and let's say less than or equal, I'm not going to keep this one, but what I was curious is whether you can actually send scores, which is something that was done in one of those studies that I shared with you at the beginning. And let's just see. So that would be under, yeah, send an email. And I just want to see if the intelligent agents now, because it does have the last login date.
Yeah, so
Wait,
just that one.
Yeah, but let's just check this. This is all I wanted to check on here. And then, yes, we'll do that. But here, let's see. No. Okay. I was hoping that they might have put in the grade, because if you could send the email that not only had their name, but said, you received the score on this exam, and then provide something based on that, you can still do it for a range of scores, but it would have been so nice if the specific score could have been included, because that's what they did in the My Professor Cares thing. So I'm going to cancel it. So checklist. So let's create a new checklist. You do that right in Course Tools, and you go down to course admin, the same place where you get the intelligent agents, and then it's under communications, I believe. No, where is it? Checklist under assessment. So you create a checklist, and we're going to create a new checklist, and let's call this module. Since I have 15 modules, we'll create this as module 151 works. You can put in text there, but that's not going to be that meaningful. And we're going to, well, I guess we could open it. We could do it in a new window when viewed, so students have that menu window they could just check separately. That I think is also new. So we're going to check this. Wait, that's not what I want to do. Okay, so here's a new check. Here's a checklist. But once you've created one, and there you could put a description. You could call this is a checklist for module 1. There are two things there. One is a category, which you don't have to use, and the other is items. But let's say you want to create some categories, and let's say one of them might be, a common thing is, these are things that you're going to read this week. And then you could list all the items that you're going to do, but that's one category. And then you might have another category. This is going to be obviously very specific to your course. Another category might be complete. Let's say these are things you have to submit, or submit could be another category. Whatever is appropriate for a typical module in your course, you create categories for it. So once you have the basic categories, you would then create specific items. And the items would be, let's say one of the items might be read chapter, 151 of your text. And you could just leave it as simple as that, but you could also put in some text there where if they click on it, provide some details. So if there's specific instructions you want to give them about it, you could include that, but they'd only see that if it's needed. And then you could put in the due date for this. And let's say this is going to be June 30th, that's fine, or you can change that to whatever you want. But then you can also choose to either display that date in the calendar or not. If you created an assignment that already has a due date on it, that will automatically be done. But if it's something they're going to turn in on paper in class, or they're going to make a poster or something else, you want to put a due date on it, because it won't show up unless it's a graded activity already in Brightspace. Or for example, when I have the discussion modules, there's an overall module due date where they have to participate, but I also have that second due date for an initial post. So for the initial post, I put that to display in the calendar, so they'll see the overall due date for the module for the discussion, but they'll also see 2 days before that they had to make an initial post in that discussion forum. And so let's say we want to display that in the calendar. And then we want to, and let's say we're going to save that. And then I could have clicked save and new, and it would keep creating them. But so here under read, we've got chapter 151 of the text. Let's say we also want to create a new item in terms of submit. And let's just say submit let's say essay 1 or something. And then you could put some instructions or an overview of it there. And then we'll put in a due date. Let's leave it the same. And this one though, is because it's an assignment, you might not click on display in calendar. So we'll save that. And then what will happen is when students log in, I don't think we can see it as a, students will basically see something like this except it won't have the outer box. It will just have all the checklists. So they'll see each item with check boxes. They check it, it'll put a check mark there, and that will be saved so that they can see what they've completed and what they haven't completed. And again, you could trigger intelligent agents based on whether they've submitted the checklist or not. And it's just giving them more structure, more detail on what's due when, and reminders, because they've got the calendar reminders, they've got the due dates in the module overview, and they can be getting reminders if they haven't completed things. You might want to send, if the reading assignment is due before class, you might want to send a reminder the night before if they haven't opened it yet. And those types of reminders can make a big difference in terms of students actually completing things. So
Wonderful. Thank you.
So play with these things. Then, if you make a mistake, you can always fix it. And once you've created one of these for one module, all you have to do is copy it and update the specific assignments and the dates. And then, you can flesh it all out. And once you've done it, it's now going to be there. You roll the course over, and then you just have to check to make sure the dates are correct the next semester. Some of them automatically adjust with the date manager, some don't. I don't remember which ones do, but you can just run through it and check. You don't have to recreate it every semester unless you're making substantial revisions in the course structure. Okay. Was this helpful?
Very. Thank you, John. I've been wondering about the intelligent agents for a long time. Thank you.
So if you ever need help, ask Maggie or me. Well, Maggie's going to be on sabbatical next year, but ask me, or Jessica's going to be here next year, and she'll be here actually for a workshop in just a couple minutes. So, so ask either of us, and we're happy to help.
Yeah, very helpful, John. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, thank you, and have a good day.
Have a good one.
Okay, so I feel like
Wait, stop the recording.